Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Carlita, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Ask the Expert: Lonely, Bullied, and Left Out: How to Help Your Child's Social Skills. Today's webcast is brought to you by the National Resource Center, a program of CHAD. We improve the lives of people affected by ADHD by providing support, training, education, and advocacy for 17 million children and adults with ADHD. With the right support, every individual with ADHD can be successful. I invite you to become a member of CHAD. With your membership, you have access to additional resources and benefits. You can join CHAD today at www.chad.org/membership. During this webinar, we would love to hear from you. We will answer any questions that you have after the presentation is complete. If we don't get to your question today, we do have health information specialists that are available Monday through Friday between 1 and 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can reach a health information specialist at 1-800-233-4050 Monday through Friday between the hours of 1 and 5 p.m. And now I'm pleased to introduce today's expert, Ms. Carolyn Maguire.
Hi, how are you?
One moment, okay. And so Ms. Maguire is our expert for today. She is a personal coach who will work with children who struggle socially and the families who support them. She is the founder of a new training curriculum at the ADD Coaching Academy, the only coach training program accredited by the International Coach Federation, ICF. She has also received a Master's of Education from Lesley University. Her revolutionary coaching program and methodologies help teach executive function skills to children, teenagers, and young adults. She is a former coach for the Hollowell Center in Sudbury, Massachusetts, and her groundbreaking book, soon to be released, Why Will No One Play With Me?, will be in stores in September. You can find more information at the website carolynmaguireauthor.com. Ms. Maguire, can you please begin today's Ask the Expert?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks so much, Carlita. Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline Maguire, and I am a mother with ADHD. I have children who are not neurotypical, and I have been an executive function coach for 15 years. And I am working all the time with kids who are struggling socially. The kids that I work with may sort of fit the profile of your kids. They are often kids whose problems are not so bad or acute that they get help at school, or because of their diagnosis or lack of diagnosis, they don't get help at school. So everything that I'm going to share with you today and everything I've built here is really all about you helping your child and bridging so that they can have an easier time. And I'm going to also explain sort of why certain social skills are really essential. The book that I wrote that's coming out in September is called Why Will No One Play With Me? And the reason that it's called Why Will No One Play With Me is that I had a little boy that I worked with who one day I was working on reading logs, and any of you who have a child with ADHD, you know that they hate to fill out these reading logs. They really don't want to do it. And I asked him a question, and I thought he would respond about his, feelings about the reading log. And instead, he turned to me and he said, "You know what I really want to know, Caroline? I want to know why will no one play with me?" And over the first couple of years I was working, I became acutely aware of the fact that parents didn't have a social life because their child was left out, that parents were really struggling to find answers. I have friends who literally got a PhD to try to help their kid, which is wonderful for the world, but really kind of feels ridiculous to me that you would have to get a PhD to help your child. So my whole goal with this book and everything I'm sharing today is so that even if you elect to work with a professional, you have the knowledge that professionals have so you can make decisions and you can help your child. Because I know as a mother, you're on the front lines. You're not necessarily going to be, the professionals aren't there every minute. So it's really important for you to understand what's going on and what you should do, and when is it time to get help, and when is it time to sort of um, help your child with these social dilemmas. This concept is for any child who needs help with social problem solving. When a child has acute problems, they're left out all the time, they're bullied. If a child has a diagnosis or not, a lot of the kids that I work with right now are introverted. And because this program was born in the crucible of inattentive kids and ADHD kids, it works with any kid. And there's like, kids where there's just an endless dilemma. You're spending every night, every day, every afternoon having discussions or intervening or figuring out or watching them be unhappy. And in that case, I really think that this is something that we want to address, especially as we're going into a new school year, and we don't want to wait and see. Because there are some kids who really don't get things intuitively, right? They just do not pick up what other people pick up, whether it's because of their lack of pausing to pay attention or because they really don't interpret the social world and they don't understand it. So this slide is all about a different definition of social skills than most professionals have. And when I present this, even at conferences to professionals, people are like, "Oh yeah." So it's not that out of the box in many ways, and in many ways it is out of the box. One of the things I noticed is that as a society, we talk about social skills as if it's chit chat, as if it's manners only. And those of us living in the world, and if you have a spouse or the uncle that everyone avoids at Thanksgiving, or anyone else who struggles with certain things, social skills are so much more than just chit chat, right? Social skills are anything that keeps your child from engaging with a group, making new friends and keeping them. If your child can keep their old friends, but they could not make new friends, that is a problem because in the work world, we are constantly interfacing with new people. They have a good relationship with their peers. They can navigate social situations as they arise, right? We want them to be able to problem solve, to be able to figure things out. Something, if their child is not able to be adaptive, right? They aren't able to adapt to a new social situation and know what they need to do and change things up. They did a study that I read, many studies that I've read about what in the workplace is necessary for people to succeed. And I read this wonderful dissertation and it talked about CEOs and their reactions to people. And one of the things they said is that they didn't expect people to have perfect social skills. What they wanted was someone to be able to scan a situation, read the room, and to adapt. And so I want to stress that we are looking for children to become the best version of themselves, right? An introvert or a shy person isn't necessarily going to be blooming into a different kind of kid. We want them to have choices and opportunity. So that's what this is all about. This isn't about changing people's basic fabric. It's about allowing them the skills and opportunities so that they can thrive. The other mention that the CEOs had is that we want people to be able to manage conflict and work in an integrated fashion with others. And if you are the parent of a child who's struggling right now, we have so many projects and so many ways in the school systems nowadays in which kids have to work together. And a lot of the kids I work with really struggle with that, either from self-advocacy, where they kind of don't speak up for themselves, or from the standpoint of getting along with others, hearing what the group wants, and adapting. And what I always say to parents is if you're kind of in the wait and see, if you're wondering if this is can't versus won't, I would encourage you to step out of that debate and think of the workplace of the future. We want to make sure our children are equipped to live and thrive in life. And you can get really muddled in this can't versus won't debate. I always try to say kids do well if they can, and if they would, if they could, they would. So if a child isn't um, necessarily having a successful time socially, usually it just means that this is not something that's easy for them, and we need to help them. So these are behaviors everyone needs to be socially successful. And this is based on both my practice as well as research. So if you are wondering if your child has a problem, if you're here and you're listening to this talk and you're thinking, well, I'm not really sure, I'm on the fence, these things are my criteria. Can your child do them across multiple environments with different people under different circumstances? And can they do them with new people, not just the people they've been with, but with new people? So, for instance, this fall, a lot of kids are matriculating to middle school, to high school, to college, to a different school, to different teams within a school. And so, one of the things that everybody needs to do in life is to be able to adapt to these new situations. And so, when you're thinking of these aspects, these things that people need to do to be socially successful, ask yourself if your child can do these things over multiple environments, because that's really, really the key. One is managing emotions rather than letting them manage you. So, what do I mean by that? If your child ruminates and really worries about things so much and they can't control their emotions, if their emotions take over their life, if they're about to take a test, they're fully prepared, something happens with a friend and then they are unable to recover, then we want to help them with that, because that's something that is going to affect their social interactions. Many of you have children like this, so you're probably nodding your head. Read the room, right? We want people to be able to scan the room and hear context, read between the lines, understand who they're with, adjust their tone, their body language, their jokes. Now, often, obviously, little kids don't read the room as well, but the way the brain develops as kids grow older, you'll notice they learn from their peers, they learn from you, and they should be learning how to read the room. So if your child isn't evolving in that way, then that probably means that this is a struggle for them. So I want to encourage you to sort of be a little bit of a detective and watch in the next few days and see if this is something your child can do. Meet people halfway. Part of life is meeting people halfway. It's sort of adjusting and adapting. One of my stories is that I had a friend who her version of compromise was that you went to the restaurant she wanted you to go to, right? And so if you know people in your life, in your adult life, who sort of never cooperate, don't meet people halfway, don't adapt and adjust, don't sort of understand this idea of choices, and that, last time you picked the movie, so this time I get to pick the movie, and are willing and able and understand this idea of meeting people halfway. A lot of kids don't understand that. But again, developmentally, as they mature, it's supposed to evolve. So the other thing I always say is, I understand that ADHD creates these challenges and that our kids are 3 to 5 years behind in terms of their development in many cases. But are they moving forward? Are you seeing progression, or do you feel like this is a real area of challenge? It may be because of maturity, but here's the thing. Now your kid is at school and their same age peers are able to do this. So when children struggle with this in a maturity way, we don't just leave them where they are, we try to help them move forward, right? We don't just say, oh, time will take care of this. We try to bring them forward because it becomes a problem with their peers. Understand social cues and unspoken rules and change your behavior in response to them. So unspoken rules are just the the things that govern our behavior. They are, when someone gets really bad news, you don't tell them your good news. And a lot of times our kids don't do this. They don't really read the room, and they don't read these social cues, and they don't adjust their behavior. Learning to walk in other people's shoes and take perspective and see things through their eyes. A lot of the kids that I work with, they really just struggle with getting someone else's perspective, and they come across as rude or insensitive. Being flexible and adaptive. So, developmentally, little kids are often not flexible and adaptive, but they should be becoming more flexible and adaptive. And being rigid and being the rule police and having very black and white thinking can really be a struggle for some kids. If it is, we need to help them with that. Knowing your audience and adapting, right? So if you walk into a room, who are you talking to? What are they about? Do you tell certain jokes in the middle of a class with a really serious teacher? This is something a lot of our kids struggle with because they don't pause to pay attention, or it's just a weakness. So that's something else I find you really have to be able to do in life. One of the things I wanted to focus on today is something that we don't talk a lot about and that you won't find anywhere else. With ADHD kids, they really, really struggle with their stories, right? So you probably heard them. A lot of kids, as a self-protecting mechanism, and because things have been hard for them, or maybe it's just something that's developed as their explanation for things, they have these stories in their head. And what happens with these stories is that it makes it hard to move them forward. So what I'm going to stress here is that if we leave the child where they are and we don't explore these stories and get their perspective and really understand where they're coming from, and then I'm going to show you a coaching technique to help explore these stories and move them forward, it's almost like moving a mountain. You can push, but it's not going to move. The more these stories are there, the more that when you try to introduce new skills, they're not hearing you and they're not necessarily thinking there's a problem or that there's hope to address that problem. So here's some common stories. These are right out of the mouth of kids that I've worked with over the years. Smart kids don't have friends, right? Okay, no, plenty of smart people have friends. Everyone is mean. A lot of kids really feel that these things come out of the blue and that there's no reason for them. And that can be a sign that they're having trouble reading the room or taking perspective, but they don't realize that they were in the middle of a lobby begging you for food, nagging someone about something. They treated someone badly and they were rude, and that people remember that and that they react to them based on that. They are my friends because I can fight with them and they will still be my friends. So remember, with the ADHD brain, we really are seeking dopamine. And if we fight with people, it actually gives us that dopamine. So a lot of kids will sort of become in these sort of negative frenemy relationships. A lot of kids tell me that they don't care if they have school friends, they have virtual friends. And I did a whole talk on that at the CHAG conference last fall. And we are all in need of live friends. So there's plenty of research that shows that children need live friends, even if they have an online community. I don't have to be social if I don't feel like it. A lot of kids, because of their executive function challenges, their ADHD challenges, feel that if they're hungry, if they're hot, if they're done, if it's the end of the day, they don't have to be social and they can treat people badly. And when you start to explore these things, you may hear things you don't like, and I'm going to teach you how to cope with that. And this is the classic one. You're the only one who thinks I have a problem. So a lot of the kids that I see and the kids that are your children who are on the line here today, they really try to say, this is just in your head. You're the only one who thinks I have a problem. So this is 11 ways to find out your child's story. And as we go through the webinar and I teach you the open questions technique of coaching, it's really going to help. The idea of coaching is that instead of telling, we listen and learn, and we ask questions and we explore. And we don't always love what we hear. I will let you know that in advance. So let's say you have heard some of these things from your child, or you suspect that they have this perspective. One thing is to listen to the way your child describes social dust ups and disappointments. And one skill I'm going to teach you later is to acknowledge and reflect back. That means just say, oh, wow, that's really interesting, or I hear you. And then you just recap what they're saying. Listen to the way your child describes herself and her role and how she believes she functions in a peer group or in a family. I'm the class clown, I'm quirky, and just ask her questions. What do you mean by quirky? What does that look like? What is it like to be the class clown? Why do you say that you're the class clown? So instead of just jumping in and saying, don't say that, you're not the class clown, ask questions, because when you ask questions, you get information, and information is power. Also, as I'm going to teach you in a minute, when kids tell you things, it's almost like they have an out of body experience, and they sort of float up above themselves and they hear what they're saying, and that allows them to witness it. They hold a mirror up to themselves. If you tell them, they're less likely to have that mirror held up. So we want them to reflect on this. When they do, when they sort of are telling you why they're the class clown, often they hear themselves say things and they say, oh, wow, no, that doesn't sound good. Okay, well, here's what I really mean. And they start to think about their positions, which is exactly what we want them to do. If your child isn't a talker and they are sort of monosyllabic and they keep to themselves, model, reflect, notice. One of my favorite things to tell parents is if someone shrugs or they say, I don't know, what does that shrug mean? Tell me about that shrug. Be curious, because you want to know what's going on for them, and understand that for kids who are very shut down, this process is going to take a while, and that's okay. Don't expect these conversations to be one long, painful conversation. It'll be several. Share from the descriptions in the Play Better plan and see what if your child resembles or understands those. So that's directly from the book. Be curious. So when little kids are little and they're 4 and they're 3, and I have a toddler at home who resembles this remark, we ask questions, right? Why is that a dinosaur? Why are there triceratops doing that? What happens? What makes shrimp pink was one that I got last week. Be curious, not as an interrogator, but as a person who's wondering what's behind that, right? So what goes on? So, your child says they are not going to participate in an activity at school. Instead of jumping in and telling them why they should go, what is it about that activity? What do you mean you don't like triathlon day? What is it that you're thinking about? So that you understand more and they can sort of give you that information. You want to also ask questions like, what is the difference between a story we tell ourselves and a fact? Ask them that question. What kind of story is helpful and what kind of story is not helpful? You know, share your own experience. I once believed that, it was really important for me to always be on time, always be perfect. And then I realized, no, I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm just trying to be on time. Listen to comments that show that the child assumes nothing can change, right? And ask them about, what if we all thought the world was flat? What if we all thought that nothing could change in the world? What would happen with that? And just have exploratory conversations. Identify a positive story and about a social situation, and ask your child to look at it with you. What would happen if we believe that is a question you can ask. Ask about assumptions, right? How come is one of the greatest questions ever. It's a simple question and it covers a lot of bases. How come you say that? You can gamify this, you can also have them draw you pictures of what's hard about their friendships if they're very young, and they'll give you a lot of information and you can explore those pictures with them. Um, as a parent social skills coach, we're trying to look at dilemmas and we're trying to help our child be more effective and really understand things that are going on for them. And here's my analogy. We wouldn't expect a child to go and swim in a pool without lessons. We wouldn't expect them to tune up a car without experience. So one of the things that happens is many times in society, we assume children are just going to know how to cope, know how to manage these things, and they don't always. So the whole point of this is that you on the front lines are going to have some tools to better explore things with your child. There's 8 elements of highly effective social skills coaching, and I don't expect you to get all of this. They are all in the book in full form, but ask, don't tell, listen and learn, keep your cool. This is a hard one. Hold the metacognitive mirror up. Metacognition is the skill where you take a bird's eye view of a situation, you look realistically at your skills and abilities, and then you create a plan and you have forward thinking. So the more we hold up the mirror to your child's thoughts and beliefs, the more we're actually building that skill. Honor your child's aha. So sometimes you're going to hear things that you don't like or you don't agree with, but that's their truth. And what we want to do is allow them that space, because otherwise they're going to shut down. Pave the way. Pave the way is an important one. Part of what I discuss in the book at length is how to have these hard conversations about social problems and how to sort of set things up and pave the way. So it's not just springing into one conversation, it's actually something that happens over time. Meet them where they are. You may not love where your child is in terms of their social beliefs and where they are, but that's what's happening, right? So we need to kind of see where they are realistically and move forward from there. Be a cheerleader. One of my examples is that one of the kids I was doing this program with, I was meeting with he and his mother, and he had been working with me for a while, and he was probably one of the most kids struggling with blurting and interrupting that I've ever worked with. And he was kind of a firefly. He was all over the place, and he really was having a hard time. But the big break for us came the day he said to me, I don't listen. Now, having a kid say, I don't listen, it may seem small to you, but it's not, it's huge. It's the realization of having a problem. So we made a huge deal about that. Kids may start a play date and do really well and then fall apart. Make a big deal about that start. Make a big deal about small things, because those things are hard for them. I'm just going to give a little bit about paving the way to the conversation. We want to have a thoughtful relationship. We want to have social interaction and reduce stress. So one of the reasons we pave the way to the conversation is to make sure that when we have discussions with them, our child is responsive and we have more of a collaborative partnership. Coaching is more than an attitude, and this is part of paving the way. It's more than a superficial style. It's a way of approaching your child, and it's a way of communicating that is, instead of telling, asking, and it's more detached. It's sitting back a little bit. How would you rather the situation be? What does that look like? How could things be different? Rather than kind of jumping into problem solving. When we jump into problem solving, we're assuming we know what the problem is, and we may not. So if you take on the coach mentality where you're listening and responding and you're understanding that people change over time, you're going to have a more collaborative dialogue with your kid, even monosyllabic kids. Trading in the tell might be, sort of your work for the fall. So we often tell kids to just mix in or try harder. When we make these statements as parents, but we have to realize that they are trying hard and they would mix in if they could. And in many cases, anxiety and what's in their head is so big that they're really not able to perform the way we would like them to. We want to end the cycle of just endlessly talking about things and move into being able to actually teach our children these skills. So one way to do that is to use questions and have a more problem solving approach and look at a situation. What would you like to do differently? What does that look like? What's going on for you right now? What does mixing in mean? Explore and be curious more than just saying, this year I want you to do X, Y, and Z, and I want it to be, so that you do join something. If they're not interested in joining or mixing in, why? What's going on for them? And what can we do to make them more comfortable? Listen and learn is really important because we really often get so frustrated we don't do this. So this is actually an assignment for you more than your child, which is to relax, to breathe in and out, and to think to yourself, I'm in learning mode. I'm not here to tell. I'm here to be curious. And the purpose of this is to hear what my child thinks, not what I think. When you're reflecting with a child, and this is just a skill that you can use so well when you have children who are really not engaging in conversation with you, or you feel like you're really having endless conversations. Either way, you're just repeating back your child's statement. And this way he hears what you said and he can clarify it, right? You're allowing him to confirm that you captured his thoughts. You're allowing him to clarify that those are the thoughts he was having. And then you want to validate his statements and express empathy. I get it. I hear you. And you want to watch your word choice. Instead of, you are overwhelmed, or you want to say, I'm hearing that you're overwhelmed, or I'm sad that you are lonely. The way that this works allows your child to really think about what he's saying, and it also gives you greater clarity. Because one of the big things I found over the years is that parents assume we know what the problem is, and really we don't. So the more we hear the child, the more we know what the core problem is. Many of the kids that I have worked with who were, for instance, really introverted, inattentive, really struggled with mixing in and fitting in. When we began to explore, we found that what we thought was the problem was really not the problem. They really weren't without anything to say. They were so worried that they were not cool that they felt that it was better to sit silent. And we had to then once we found that out, we could have a conversation about it. Okay, but if you sit silent, people can't get to know you and they have creepy thoughts about you because you're just sitting staring at them. You're getting more information. Coaching is made up of those two skills, open-ended questions and reflective listening. And by asking open questions that are who, what, when, where, how, you're asking rather than telling. So instead of saying you're rude, we would ask what people thought. What did someone feel when you ignored them? I had a kid the other day who was telling me that when people talk too long and they are annoying and they go on, he just walks away. And I asked him, well, what happens then? And he said, well, kids then sometimes close him out of the circle. In other words, they physically move their bodies so that he can't be part of the circle. But he did not see that as having a connection to his previous behavior. You probably see it in glaring terms, but he didn't see it that way. So I used the coaching technique. I didn't say to him, duh, you're rude to them, and then they close you out of the circle. I said, well, okay, let's go back. What happened before? Well, okay, you motioned and gestured people to pick up the pace, or you told them that they'd talked too long, or you said you'd heard enough. What do you think they felt about that? Nothing. Oh, really? Let's role play. Let me show you what that looks like. And then he started to say, oh, well, I guess that doesn't look good. And then he started to, just by me reflecting and asking questions, make the connection himself between the fact that he treats people certain ways and then he ends up a kid who no one passes the basketball to, rather than me telling him, in which case he might yes me to death, but he doesn't really hear the problem and he doesn't really realize and own his own behavior. Because our goal here is to change the way our kids approach the social world, not necessarily to just get them to say yes. You get a lot of truthful information from open-ended questions. It allows your child to self-evaluate. It causes less conflict. They are, as I mentioned several times, witness their statements. It develops and promotes their self-talk. Our self-talk is our rudder. It is part of what creates self-regulation, and it is part of what we need in order to have not only ethics, but awareness of the future, awareness of what's going on for other people. And so the more we use this coaching technique, we're actually promoting them learning self-talk and having that problem solving. And I find that it allows them to be more receptive to the information because they're coming up with it themselves. When kids don't self-regulate or they don't necessarily have that self-talk, I often, when I'm debriefing with them about a situation, ask them, did they hear a voice in their head that said, stop, this isn't a good idea? And sometimes they'll tell me that they did. If they did, that means we just need to turn up the volume on that voice. If they didn't, now we know we need to develop that voice. But either way, that voice is imperative, and coaching helps with that voice. If your child says, I don't know, I don't remember, they shrug at you, they're not receptive, and this is many kids, remember, this is going to be a process over time. We want to make our child comfortable, and we also have to look at, is there space in our lives where we are having communication and we are having one-on-one time and we are having things like family dinner? If there isn't that space, then that's the first thing to work on that disappearing act, to work on them going downstairs to the basement every day and playing video games till they go to bed, looking at that so that there is space for you to have these kind of conversations. That's sort of like the pre-paving. And if they say, I don't know, ask them to tell you more about them. I love to use humor and I say funny, outrageous things, and then they'll be like, no, Caroline, it's not that. I do this with teenagers a lot. I also have an excuse bucket in my office. And so if a teenager is refusing to answer me, I take a little piece of paper and I crunch it up and I say I'm going to shoot a basket in the excuse bucket. Anything funny to do it. And I also will make statements to them. I'll say, here's my synopsis of it. Is it A, is it B, or is it C? And sometimes it actually gets them talking because they're like, no, it's not that at all. And then you get some information. You also can make a deal with them and say, I'm going to say 4 words. If you don't want me to say these 4 words, I won't use them today. Anything you can do to get them talking. And like I said, if they shrug, ask them about the shrug, and not interrogating, a little more detached, like I've demonstrated, so that they will talk to you. The idea behind the Play Better plan, and now I'll take questions in a second, is, a big, big concept, and this is just a small slice of it. The idea is that you learn how to coach, and then you can actually teach your child the social skills. So the book actually has social skills lessons in it, and it explores in depth some of these concepts. But I wanted to give you just a little slice because my belief is that anyone raising an ADHD kid is going to benefit from these open questions. It's going to have a better time if you can get your kid talking. So we'll take questions now. Let's see if I can figure out how to get to the questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. McGuire, for your presentation. As you've stated, we are going to go ahead and open the floor for questions. Feel free to type your questions in the box. I'll read them off and we'll have a response from Ms. McGuire as to how we can go about solving our questions. The first question, how can I learn to use open-ended questions in a more natural way? Can you give us some points and strategies on that?
Absolutely great question. I'm so glad you asked that question. You know, when I give certain longer speeches, I often say that this technique works with coworkers, bosses, and mother-in-laws. So I would say the best way to do this is to start asking questions in your daily life, right? So my joke is always, you know, your mother-in-law tells you that she has to make the turkey for Thanksgiving and no one else can. Instead of just letting that drop or ignoring it, just sort of say, how come? Why is that important to you right now? And try to ask questions of people in your life, not to interrogate them, but to get better at open questions. There's two or three questions you can use for almost anything. You know, what does it look like? What does it feel like? And how come? Right? And if you just use those simple questions, you're going to get a lot of information. So, my biggest advice is start doing this in your daily life, and especially with the difficult people in your life. And I've actually had a lot of the folks in the publishing house that publish Why Will No One Play With Me, Hachette, have had the opportunity to read the book ahead. And they've told me that they are doing that with people in their lives, and it actually diffuses a lot, which we know. So I think that would be a way to do that.
Great. This next question says, do you have any tips for how we can talk to middle school personnel about social skills training?
Yes. So, in terms of talking to administrators and talking to folks in the middle school, I think the best advice that I have is to um, attach it to the things that are really in the zeitgeist right now, which is depression and other bullying and teen behaviors, because administrators are very worried about that. And what we are doing is not working. So I would suggest to them, I would go to them with that and link, there's strong links between kids who have social problems, whether they are the bystander or the bully, um, to those systemic problems. I also would go having found some solutions, whether it's a therapist who could come in or something else. Know that many times administrators do not want to pay for things, so they're afraid to give referrals because they're afraid that the school district would have to pay for them. The other thing is that your PTG or special education pack can sponsor talks for the teachers. And I have seen that be the most effective, because a lot of times educators don't know about social skills. They think wait and see works. They think that things will get better on their own. They don't understand that some kids need direct intervention. And they don't understand one really important thing, which is that circle time and stuff is great, except the kid who has the problem doesn't necessarily know you're talking to them. And so, you know, a lot of times educators will say, well, we do have a program for that. Yes, but it's not necessarily as effective as it could be. But this is something that I think as parents, if you take this up as a cause, it's really, really powerful.
So this participant is asking, can you give us a few more strategies or examples of open-ended questions, particularly for the earlier age? I have a child who's 7 years old, and I've tried to use open-ended questions, but I still get the excuse I don't know. What can I do to better approach this?
Okay. So, yes, with little ones, sometimes they don't know or they can't articulate it as well because, you know, some kids at 7, you know, talk like Walter Cronkite, and some kids when they're 7 just really don't have those verbal skills. And the key to this is the verbal skills. With little kids like that, I like to use two things. One, a buffet of options. Is it this or is it that? Right? You ask a question, you can't answer it. Okay, let me propose some ideas of what it could be. And then they are able to respond. No, it's not that I don't want to go in the lunchroom. It's that I feel afraid, whatever it is. The second item is to use visuals because children who have, as language develops, there is less need for visuals. But a lot of times with younger children, we use visuals. That's why Why Won't Play With Me is highly visual. People have asked that question. And I said, well, I built it for every age group, but I didn't want parents to have to invent visuals. So it's highly visual. So the more you can use a visual, even drawing it, the more the open questions will be effective. And all that means is that for your child, also, they may be more concrete. So kids who are more concrete, we don't ask as many open questions as we do in this situation kind of questions until they mature enough to sort of be broader. Hope that helps.
That is very helpful. Thank you so much. Our next question: how can we help children through the overwhelming use of technology for school? Being able to stay on track with assignments and various apps being used for homework submittal. Is there a way that we can address that?
Yeah, so I think that that's a larger question, not necessarily what we're talking about here today. But I think with kids with ADHD, they tend to have a lot of attraction to technology. It's certainly here to stay. I think the more we give them self-regulation tools, the more that technology and managing that can become a skill rather than something that takes over their lives. In terms of submitting assignments, that really goes back to executive function skills, right? And the biggest thing I would say about this is future thinking. There's something called mimetic ideational information processing, and that's a mind mime. It's the ability to sort of picture your future self doing something. So the more we can teach that skill of how do you picture yourself, and Sarah Ward, who's an executive function coach, talks a lot about this if you want to check out her stuff. The more they can actually have that picture in their head of doing the assignment and turning it in, which is the gap and why they're not turning it in or why they're not fulfilling that sort of technological mission. So that's like a high level answer, but that is one piece of it that you will want to check out.
Great. Here's our last question for today. This participant says, I work in a pediatrician neural practice, and we often see parents who seem to deny their child has poor behavior and expects or relies very heavily on the medication. Is there a way that we can help these parents use some of the skills that you've mentioned today?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that what happens with certain parents is that they think that either the problem feels too overwhelming or they think that the child will outgrow it, or they have a story themselves that they don't want the child's, sort of wings to be clipped and they want them to remain their true self. Well, one of the things I always say to people is that even the quirkiest kid, even the kids who back in our day were goth, even the kids who are a little bit quirky can have a group and have friends. But they also have to have positive group behaviors in any group. So one of the things I would say is that we can look at, can the kid do those 7 things I outlined at the beginning of the talk? And literally, as a practitioner, to be giving them the links to talks like this, the information, and also to provide some kind of education so that they hear that, the child has to learn to self-manage. And that way you're not alone in this. The more you couple your practice with education, the more that they will benefit. So I do know a lot of practitioners who have speakers and education nights and who share information like this, because the more educated your practice becomes, the more your clients are easier to influence. So that would be my big advice. And also to ask them, the skill is not in the pill. And I'm not taking a stand pro or against medication, but the fact is that the skills come from strategies and come from learning new behaviors. So to ask them, okay, they're having this, what else are we going to do?
Okay, that was very helpful information for us. This will be, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay,
Caroline, do we have time for one more question?
sure.
Okay. This question is from a parent. It says, my son has decided that he's going to fight with his younger sister, who is about 21 months years old. How can I convince my son that this is not a great approach to develop a relationship with his sister? He's currently 9.
Well, one thing I'd say is that we have to remember the developmental delay. So a lot of times he's 9, but he's really operating more like a 6-year-old. And that's not, I don't know because I don't know the child, but a lot of times that's the case. I think that in many cases there's issues of territoriality, as well as the fact that what is it that makes you develop a relationship with someone. So I would ask this child to sort of work with you on, how do you make a friendship with someone? How do you make a relationship with someone? And I would love to know what he feels about the baby, what he feels about this younger sibling. And is this a self-regulation issue where he just can't necessarily easily control himself? I've seen that a lot. And with sibling issues, the more we help with the self-regulation and hold a mirror up to those behaviors, the more he will move forward. The other thing is to create a place and space for him to feel that he has something to teach her. Because if he has something to teach her, then he's going to foster a better relationship. And I'm sure there's many things he knows how to do that she doesn't know how to do. And again, this is a really high level answer because there's entire books written about this. But I definitely see this as, the question for me is this systemic where he does this with all his relationships, or is this sort of about that sibling rivalry? And in that case, I definitely think you want to make sure that there's self-regulation being taught and that she's also safe.
All right. Well, everyone, that's all the time that we have for our webinar today. I'd like to thank you for the wonderful presentation that you've given us, Ms. Maguire. Thank you to our participants for taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed today's presentation, you can see this presentation and others like it on our YouTube channel at Help for ADHD / Ask the Expert. That's Help for ADHD / Ask the Expert. This concludes today's presentation.